Okay, so today we've got Stephen Morris of the Workers' Union of England. I think I got that right.
No,
No.
Workers of England Union.
Workers of England Union, but you don't just cover England, do you?
No, we will cover anywhere. We cover England and Wales mainly.
Yeah.
Purely because the employment tribunal procedures are the same in England and Wales.
Right.
Scotland are slightly different, although we do have members in Scotland. I've not dealt with a tribunal up there, so I'd have to refresh myself.
Okay.
I was asked to represent in Isle of Man recently, but again, that is a different jurisdiction as far as employment law is concerned.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that's really come to light, that people are becoming more aware that there is different jurisdictions, including health and safety and coronavirus acts.
Right, so the HSE is different in Scotland and the Isle of Man as well, is it?
Yeah, it's obviously because the health and safety laws are devolved. So Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, their assemblies and parliaments look after their own health regulations. The UK government actually only has legislation over England.
Right.
And one of the anomalies which recently occurred in December when they were bringing the lockdown is you had Scottish and Welsh MPs voting on a purely English lockdown.
Oh.
That's where the issue on devolution and all the problems that have occurred keep going on, because Boris only when he's talking about health and the coronavirus legislations only speaks for England. Same with Matt Hancock. And there was a lot of confusion in the early days where they were saying you can only go out once a day for exercise, you can only do go out within 5 mile radius, and we had all these drones in Derbyshire tracking people on the hills.
Yeah.
But it was completely false, because that only really applied in Scotland and Wales.
Right.
English law said you could go out as many times as you want, and you could go as far as you want, because unless it specifically states you can't, then you can. And the Welsh one actually said they had a limit of once a day and only within a 5 mile status.
Yes.
So they specifically stated what you can and can't do. And in Scotland, because they don't use common law as we use it, they use the old like Roman law.
Yeah.
They never said that you could do it, so you can't do it. Theirs is the opposite of England.
Really?
So there was a lot of issues coming about, and this is where the confusion was arising, because the laws of England, Scotland and Wales are different, and they're run by different different parliaments or assemblies.
So in Scotland, you just mentioned that common law isn't the same in Scotland because they use Roman law, so they have to be given permission to do anything, and if they're not permitted, then they can't do it. What about their rights and freedoms as living men and women? Well,
that's the law that they do. This is where nobody's really challenged in Scotland, that kind of law where it's your freedom of expression, your freedom of association, your freedom to your basic human rights, as we would deem it. England's human rights has been enshrined for like over 1,000 years. We're coming up to Neil Maffar's 700th birthday kind of thing. Sorry, 1700th birthday, I think it is, if I get it right. But the issue in Scotland is nobody's really ever challenged it, and which is a surprise.
Yeah, because that's actually one of the facilities that's available to people that do want to follow common law is the common law court, and that's actually in Scotland.
Yeah, but the laws just don't seem different to England, and this is where even some of the solicitors and that I was dealing with, who asked me to deal with the freedom of speech issue, actually in the Isle of Man, it was the radio presenter who said some items which she got targeted for. The issue was the solicitors operating in England didn't even know there was different jurisdictions on law. Now, in Wales, they are actually trying to seek to separate from the laws of England and Wales.
Yes.
So they're trying to get their own separation, just like Scotland is at the moment. So obviously you have the laws of England and Wales, laws of Scotland and the laws of Northern Ireland. All different, and that's why from a union point with employment law, we cover England and Wales because it's the same.
Yeah.
You know, no difference.
Even if Wales does manage to devolve more, the laws are the same.
Well, at the moment, the laws are the same. If they devolve more, then
Yeah.
there is a chance that the Welsh, well, they've rebranded as Welsh Parliament, they could start to change it themselves.
Right.
At the moment, they don't have that power to change it.
Right. Okay. Because I'm actually in Wales.
Yes. So
yeah. Yes, that's where we met, wasn't it?
It was. Like I say, unfortunately, quite a lot of them have passed away now, but I did spend the first 30 years of my life in North Wales and working in North Wales for a couple of seasons. So I do have quite an affinity to North Wales particularly.
Yeah. So long may the laws of England and Wales align, because it's well,
it's all about making sure that whichever way they go, if they do separate, then we need to make sure that employees' rights are protected and employees are fully aware of those rights.
Yeah.
Which is an issue at the minute where employees are just not being told. I had a relation ring me up last night to do with vaccine testing, COVID testing, and the employer had said, like, we want you to do testing at home, and all kinds of things. And it's like, so they rang me up, said, Steve, what's the position on this? And I said, well, it's a voluntary procedure. And said, well, the employer's not actually told them it's voluntary. So I explained the issues on Health and Safety at Work Act and all the other points, gave her everything that she needed to know. She rang the employer this morning. All she said to him was, well, that email you sent me, it is voluntary though, isn't it? And then they had to admit, yes, it is. So you don't have to do it if you don't want to. And she said, well, why haven't you put it in the email that it's voluntary?
Yeah, this is what we're finding. We're finding because we've got the empowering business, so we tend to focus at small businesses, and we're also trying to make people aware of their rights. And we use kind of like a hybrid of common law, equity law, trust law, and contract law as well, but also using their acts, statutes, and codes against them, using the system not against them, but to protect us as well. And we do have quite a few employees who feel pretty stuck because they're being sacked. They are being sacked for not wanting to wear masks or visors, again, for the testing as well. And pretty soon it's going to be the vaccine apartheid, isn't it?
It is. And like you say, one of the things is the main rule of a HR advisor is to protect the business, to protect your business and give appropriate advice. I've been in meetings even with the NHS with HR advisors and managers who have been looking to sack people for not having masks and that. And the first thing we say is, well, can you give us a copy of your risk assessment? It's like, well, we haven't got one. Well, under the Management of Health and Safety at Work Act 99, you have to do a risk assessment, both a company one and an individual, because it's a medical issue. So where are they? Well, we ain't got one. So therefore you're in breach of that.
Yeah.
And then we start to expand it into the Health and Safety at Work Act Section 2. As an organisation, you tend to hear companies saying, well, we've got a responsibility to the client. We've got a responsibility to the client. Well, yeah, but you do have an equal responsibility to your employee. And that's under the same act. And then as an individual, as a manager or an owner, you're individually responsible for your acts or omissions under Section 7. And so it's informing these businesses that actually you've not followed procedures, you're failing in your duty of care, and your business is now at risk of being taken to court. But everybody seems to be a little bit blinkered and following the government narrative that it's the old thing, and it protect your granny. Now they're getting your granny to say, protect me, do as your nan says. And it's like, well, hang on, what about my rights? As an employer, you have to protect my rights. You have to make sure that my health and safety is just as important as anybody else, but you're failing. Absolutely. This is one thing we really need to push, that there is current laws, and I know a lot of people, we've had this discussion when I came down, met you down in Wales. There is a lot of discussions about common laws, the Magna Carta, the Bill of Rights, which are great in themselves, but at the moment, from my point of view, you see people's shutters come down.
Yes.
At the moment, we've got, oh, you're an anti-masker, you're an anti-vaxxer. You mentioned common law, the Bill of Rights, Magna Carta. They go, oh, you're one of those, are you?
You're one of those, yeah.
Yeah. So the idea, from my point and from the union point, is to use the legislations that people already know and already aware of to protect our rights.
Yes.
And the Equality Act, obviously, is another good one. People seem to think that businesses in stores, because we had one about a store, because I'm dealing with one at the moment, with another Morrison's one that got refused, a guy who got refused entry for not wearing a mask. He's well medically diagnosed as not being able to, but the police backed up the manager at the store. Now the police have had to issue an apology, basically saying the officer wasn't fully aware of the legislations. Well, they shouldn't have been out in uniform if that was the case.
Yeah.
But again, under the Section 29 of the Equality Act, you cannot deny somebody a provision of service based on an exemption of disability.
So is that the case even if it's private, like, you know, for example, Morrison's, it's a private store. So would it not be the same as if it was a nightclub and they had a dress code and you turned up wearing trousers and they refused you entry? Do they not have the right to impose rules on their own property?
Well, they do have the right to impose rules. However, they cannot discriminate. The issue on a dress code is slightly different, because it may not be necessarily to do with discrimination or medical discrimination. The issue of a mask is clearly a medical issue. You can quite clearly say you're exempt. Section 4A.2 says that whether it causes you stress or anxiety. That's it, and they must accept it. They cannot question you about it. You don't have to show an exemption card, lanyard.
I think a lot of people are going to be very happy to hear you say that.
Well, one of the things is I've got a couple of documents that I usually carry around with me, but I also say, well, if you don't believe me, just go on YouTube and check out Julie Hartley-Brewer interviewing the Police and Crime Commissioner for West Midlands on the 18th of January. He tells.
Who's that?
He's the Police and Crime Commissioner for the West Midlands.
Yeah.
When he was interviewed, he quite clearly stated that you must accept the verbal word of the person when they say they're exempt.
Yeah.
That is the law. So it's not just a case of whether people try and believe me or I shove a letter in front of their face. I just say, well, just go and Google this interview. You know, this is where the guy's saying it.
Who was the interviewer again, Stephen?
Sorry?
Who was the interviewer?
It was Julie Hartley-Brewer on Talk Radio.
Julie Hartley-Brewer?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
On the 18th of Jan.
Yeah.
And the only time I ever got challenged on a mask recently, well, actually challenged, was at a store I went to, a big warehouse in the Stoke-on-Trent. And the canteen manager asked me about my mask and said, I'm exempt, don't wear a mask. So she said, right, okay. So I went down to meet the member, and we discussing his case. And then another manager came down and said, I've been asked to come and see you about why you're not wearing a mask.
Yeah. I
said, oh, was it the canteen manager? He went, yeah. So I just pulled out the document and said, can you tell her to read section 3 and 4 of this document? It's a cabinet office document. I said, I've already told him exempt. She's got to accept it. If she pursues it, I'll class it as harassment and victimization. And he went, oh, no, it's okay. She's probably just overzealous. I said, no. What it is, it's bordering on the grounds of harassment and victimization because of my exemption. Yeah. And he said, right, okay, no worries. And he just went away.
Good.
But it's being armed with the right arsenal, and employees and small businesses need to be aware of what they can or can't do. And the dress code one is, just thinking offhand now, the dress code one could be quite a difficult one if, say, although they don't tend to go into nightclubs, but if you had a Sikh come in with his dagger and you have a clear policy of no weapons in your workplace, where do you go with that? Because it could come under a religious exemption.
Yeah. That's
when
really
you couldn't
true.
discriminate, but it's not medical, because the issue at the moment is all to do with medical.
It
Or,
is.
not just medical, but philosophical belief. That's another one that we need to go down. It's not just whether you're medically against it, but philosophical belief is people don't wear masks. And if you look at the European Court of Human Rights rulings on the burqa, both in France and Belgium, where they deemed banning the burqa was not unlawful. So you can legitimately ban the, so you can legitimately say you're not allowed in with a burqa.
Yeah.
The issue there, they said, well, in our culture and our life in this country, they was using France and Belgium at the time, we use facial expressions and this to determine how people are feeling, how people are communicating, and a form of, it's part of our culture. So if you use that same law that they've used to say, well, banning the burqa is justified, we can say, well, hang on, masking people isn't justified.
Yeah.
And you can really say, well, it's to do with medical. Well, this is where we go back to the risk assessments. Once they do a risk assessment, it can be challenged.
Yes.
Is it a reasonable request? So is the mask, does the mask actually stop the virus?
Yeah.
Well, no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Does the vaccine actually stop you getting it or transmitting it? No, it doesn't.
No.
So it's personal choice whether you have the vaccine or not. I know some companies have said if you don't have the vax, they may look at whether it reduces your sick pay or not if you go off with it.
Right.
But then where do you go with that one? Do you say, well, if you don't have the flu jab, do you have the same? So, but once you get the risk assessment, that's where you can start to challenge the companies.
Yes.
And the validity of the request, because it will always fall down because the risk assessments on masks do not stand up.
No, they don't. I work in construction and I've actually face fit tested people for face masks for respiratory protective equipment. And you think that the procedure they have to go through in order to ensure that dust isn't getting through, let alone viruses, is ridiculous.
As we know, the virus, the actual masks they're currently using are actually only for bacteria. They're only to stop bacteria. And as we know, viruses are 1,000 times smaller than bacteria. On the government websites, it actually says about doing all the other things first: social distancing, cleansing, buddy partnering. Then it actually says on masks that as a kind of a last resort, masks may be an option. And this is their words. It says, but it may be only marginally beneficial. And again, you go on the Health and Safety Executive website, on the mask, it says exactly the same thing. And to do with the masks that people are wearing, it actually says they're only beneficial in a clinical environment.
Right.
Because in a clinical environment, what have you already done? You've already got a clean environment, a controlled environment. So the mask is only a last resort to all the other procedures you put in place.
Everything else, yeah, absolutely.
So the issues on masks can be quite clearly discredited as you know, they were first off when they were telling us it in March and April last year that masks don't work.
Yeah.
And then they were telling you just put anything over your face, a scarf will do. Well, no, it won't. And there is ulterior. I believe there is ulterior motives because it's quite easily a visual item to see who's compliance, who's falling for it, and who's not.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've actually got cases on the go for mass discrimination, test discrimination, etc. So you help employees and businesses alike.
It's not so much businesses, it's mainly employees that we're dealing with, although we do help even a director is an employee, so we do have people who are self-employed, but with a self-employed, a business owner, it depends what category they come under, because they may be classed as a contract worker. They may have their own company but then contracted to people. We have quite a few who work in the NHS who maybe consultants, maybe a consultant, but they'll have their own registered company. But they're contracted to the NHS. because they're a contract worker, we represent them, and we've got quite a few members like that. So it all depends how much control the organisation you're contracted to has over your business.
Right.
And that was the recent case in the Uber one, where Uber lost against the drivers because Uber controlled basically everything the driver did. So therefore, they're a contract worker.
Oh, yes.
The easiest way to explain it is if a self-employed builder comes to you and says, right, okay, I'm going to do your driveway. You say, okay, it's so much to do the driveway. There's the money. He builds you your driveway. You don't ask him how he's going to do it, what materials or whatever. It's just a case of he turns up, he does it, gets paid, goes home.
Yeah.
But if you told him he had to work between 9 and 5, he had to use certain materials, he had to use certain PPE, he had to follow your rules and regulations. Once he did the job, then he becomes a contract worker, and that's where the rules begin to change. But we're always looking to help small businesses. You know, I only got into trade union stuff by chance. I wasn't managing retail for 15 years, managing various different outlets before I got into public transport. And then they were looking for a branch secretary for Unite. Nobody else was willing to do it. I did it. That was in 2003, and I've been dealing with trade unions ever since. And I joined this union, which was set up in 2010. So I can actually see both the management side, because I've dealt with management stuff for so long. Even when I went in public transport, I was managing a lot of staff at times, and I can see and I always worked on the basis for the long-term benefit of the company. You got to have a decent workforce and decent management. You know, if you have poor management, the company will go under. But if you have poor workforce, the manager will be pulling out his hair, and then eventually it'll go under anyway. You've got to work as a team, both managers and employees, and I always work on that basis. The Workers of England Union, so your listeners and viewers might not be aware, we're completely independent. We were set up to be completely independent from politics. We're not affiliated to any political party. We're not affiliated to the British TUC, which is affiliated to Labour. The TUC only has around 48 unions registered with it out of 166, I think it is at the latest count in the UK. We don't use workplace reps. Our reps are independent. Yeah. So therefore they only get paid by membership fee. So it's quite clear that their only concern is the member. Yeah. But they're also aware that the member has to make sure that put some reality into the members list. I usually say, well, what's the point of a trade union going in for a massive pay rise with a company, and then within 18 months that company's gone bust because it couldn't afford it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just pointless, because therefore I've not properly represented the member. You've got to look at the reality of things, and especially going forward now. This is what annoys me about the current situation. Small businesses have been hammered. You can go and buy a card, or you can, from the major superstores, you can go and buy a set of shoes, but you can't go to your local shoe shop or your local card shop. Yeah, absolutely. You know? And I think that is basically the government's got to be accountable for that, because they're allowing the major corporations to become a monopoly.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to be a member of the Federation of Small Businesses, and when it came for renewal in January, I sent them a really snotty letter just to say I wouldn't be renewing, because they've done absolutely nothing to help small businesses through all of this pandemic or plandemic, and they should have stood up for us, but they've not. They've just quietly applauded our resilience in doing what the government says. And I think, no, that's just wrong.
It's wrong. The small, because obviously we've seen the demise of the high street going on for years. That's why I came out of retail in '99, because I already saw things changing then. But then they started to switch people. If you remember, there was a phase of trying to get people to go to the out of town warehouses,
the factory outlet thing.
Yeah, the big factory outlets. And then suddenly they did thinking, oh, well, suddenly we need to start getting people back into the high street. But they don't realise that it's small businesses in High Street. You've still got your massive superstores that are still using these out of town centres.
Yeah.
And the other thing, it gets contradicted because they wanted people out of the cars. They wanted people to use public transport, but now people don't use public transport because you're classing it as a high risk form of transport. So it just seems like they're going around in circles and don't have a long-term business plan.
Yeah.
And to me, the small businesses have always been the where all development and all the economy is built from. Just so again, your readers and listeners might be aware, I'm the odd one out in my family. All my dads and my uncles were all self-employed, mainly in the building game themselves. So I've come from a background of self-employed builders. So I've grown up seeing how the economy affects them and what they needed to do to basically bring me and my cousins up.
Yeah.
And like I said, I ran some small shops, so seeing how we needed to develop the small businesses and get people into the high street. Because if you go into the high street, you can have a vast array of stores that you can pick everything from.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funding your local community as well.
Your local community,
rather than shareholders' yachts.
I always say about buying local from it. I don't like having to get in my car, go to an out of town centre. I'd rather just. Well, if you think about it, if you go down the environmentalist route, you're having people going to these out of town centres in the car because they can't use public transport now because it's a high risk. You can't carry things on public transport.
Yeah.
So why can't you just nip down to your local?
Yeah. Local grocery, the grocer's store. Yeah. Do you remember those?
Which actually tends to be more beneficial because they would tend to source it local as well.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that your organisation is challenging the lockdowns.
Yeah, I'm the lead claimant against the lockdown basically in England is the one that we're challenging.
Yeah.
Ours differs differently to people like the Dolan case because ours is quite specific to England, the Bill of Rights, the Magna Carta, and the Health Protection Act of '84, which basically the government didn't have any authority to do what they've done under it, under any of the acts. The only thing that they could do was limit or test people coming in and out of the country at ports and airports.
Yes.
Which, if you remember, there was millions of people travelling in and out of the country in the first couple of lockdowns and didn't do nothing about it. No. And that was actually the only legislation they could have done at the very beginning. But locking down the interior of the country, you have no lawful right to do so.
Okay.
And we're just waiting for that. There's been a lot of the legal process is very backwards and forwards with documents. We submit ours, they submit their response, we submit a response to their response, and their response to our response, and all that kind of stuff. But now we're just waiting for a court date, and you can guarantee they're going to drag it on until after the lockdowns are lifted, and then suddenly say, well, it's a little bit late now. Obviously, from me being in Greater Manchester, the one that triggered it for me here was last year when the government put Greater Manchester in lockdown on the eve of Eid.
Right.
And they were saying, if you go out, you could be arrested, it's unlawful, this, that and the other.
Yeah.
Matt Hancock blatantly lied on TV because there was no such law. It didn't come in for another 5 days.
Yes.
It was a blatant lie.
Yes.
And one of the reasons for the lockdown, which only came out in the local papers for a very short period, was in Oldham, there was high testing in one area, and it showed one family and their extended family in one street was the reason why Oldham went into lockdown in the first place.
Wow.
And they were from the group that was obviously going to celebrate Eid.
Yeah.
Then the next group was in an area called Cheetham Hill in Manchester and another area called Rusholme. So the main three areas that put Greater Manchester into lockdown was the community that was going to celebrate Eid. And that's why they had to quickly act on the Eid one. And that's why they said you can't go out. But by telling us you can't go out, it was against the law. Actually, it wasn't, because there was no such law.
No. But with you continuing with it, even if it's outside of lockdown, and finding, or if it does get found in your favour that the lockdown was unlawful, that will stop it happening in future, won't it?
It will. Well, what they'll try and do, they'll try and change the law, but as we know, there's certain laws and rights they cannot change.
Yeah.
Which are set in the Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta. There's certain ones that cannot change.
Yes.
No matter what. And although they may try and put more restrictions on, this will restrict. Now, going back to the lockdown of Greater Manchester, when a similar thing occurred in Liverpool near enough the same time, what Liverpool did, they actually locked down the street where it was, which would be more beneficial, would actually be more reasonable than locking down an entire borough, because people up on the hills of Saddleworth above Oldham were nowhere near this place, but they were still locked down. But in Liverpool, they did the initial lockdown. And as we know, the testing in Liverpool was massively flawed. It just showed it was just
in the schools as well.
Yeah. So, but for us, the issue is to try and make sure that they're pulled up. And obviously, Matt Hancock, in our case, the fact that he lied on TV, which was basically obvious, he's only further enhanced the fact that he's just been found to have acted unlawfully in dishing out various contracts to his local landlord.
Yes, yeah.
You know,
absolutely. It's abhorrent, isn't it?
It is. So there's a lot of things going on. So yeah, we're right at the forefront, both of pushing for giving people the proper information as an employee.
Yes.
We're certainly looking to help small businesses thrive, because a small business, it is a thing. It's like from small acorns, big trees grow, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, so if you've got a small business today, who's to say that in a couple of years' time you're not looking to take on people?
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
As you said, the Federation of Small Businesses did nothing to help you.
No.
But the other thing is, unions should also be helping small businesses. We shouldn't be battering small businesses. Unions should say, right, how can we help you to become a responsible employer? Because you usually find small businesses are people who've got an enthusiasm for a particular product, but they're not necessarily au fait with employment law issues.
Right.
You know, so because it might be said, well, I'm really passionate about, I don't know if I take my wife for an example, if she says she's passionate about knitting and wool and crocheting and all that lot. So if she had a wool shop, great. But does she necessarily know everything about employment law? Yeah. No.
This is it. People don't think about that when they're setting up their businesses, do they?
That's it. And then going forward, you might say, well, I've suddenly got to take somebody on. How do we do it?
Yeah.
You know? But as a trade union, we would be saying, well, we should be saying to you, and this is what your Federation of Small Businesses should be saying, is how can we help you make sure you do the right move?
Yeah, absolutely.
That you're not putting the long-term viability of your business at risk, and that you can grow and take on more people.
So how does the Workers of England Union help people with that? Do you have things like webinars and information on your website, or?
Well, normally we just say to people, just get in touch with us, and if there's certain policies or procedures you're unsure about, we will happily discuss it. We'll draft it up, work with you. We're not there to. This is where we're completely different from other trade unions. We're not there to say, right, we will batter you with everything. We will look at what works for you, what works for to make sure that the employer's fine.
Yeah.
Coming from an employer's background, the most I ever managed was 120 staff.
Right.
So, but I was also a police liaison officer for special events on Metrolink. So I dealt with major organisations, Man City, Man United, the police, and that in liaising with all these groups. But it was always about finding the best way forward for everybody.
Yeah. Okay. Constructive solutions.
So as an example, I'll use issue on social media at the moment, which has been a big issue on free speech.
Yes.
So we tell people your rights are protected, but don't put who you work for on your social media.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So if an employer said to us, how do I draft up a social media policy? We'd be saying, well, okay, do this, but tell your employees, don't put anything on your Facebook that you work for us.
Yeah.
But also as an employee, don't call us.
Mm.
Don't put anything negative on.
Yeah.
Okay. And other than that, your rights then should be protected. You'd be able to say and do express your views and opinions. And I'll refer to Redfern because in the free speech arena at the moment, they talk about the Granger case. You know, they'll use the 5 tests. Are your views respectable in a democratic society, worthy of respect, and all this? Well, Granger predates the Equality Act, and then the Equality Act goes on about treating people with respect and values and that.
Mm.
But there's cases after that which are more relevant, like Redfern, that says you're allowed to express views and opinions, even those that may shock, offend, and disturb.
Okay.
So if as an employer, if you're pulling up an employee saying, well, you've posted something on Facebook that offended somebody, and we'll be saying, well, hang on, under case law, they're allowed to.
Yeah.
Right. However, as an employee, have you got on their Facebook who you work for?
Mm.
Right. Okay. If you have, the company could look at doing you for bringing the company into disrepute.
Yeah.
Because you're tying yourself with the company.
Yeah.
So yeah, we work with the companies to draft the policies that both help the employer address issues with the employee if they need to. So it's not a case of you cannot touch that employee no matter what.
Yeah.
I will tell you that yes, you can if they have their employees' details on that Facebook page or Twitter account.
Right. So they need to have a clear divide between their own personal opinions and
there's a clear divide. Philosophical beliefs even more protected. If you're a government organisation, then it's even stricter.
Yeah.
You cannot interfere even in the slightest in deterring a person from expressing their views and opinions.
Right.
Which is what we have at the moment. I've dealt with a lady in the centre of Wales actually. She was dealing with originally with the GMB, and GMB just said, "Don't go down all that human rights stuff. It won't help you. It's no good." And she said, "Oh right." So then she heard about us, came to us. We dealt with her case, and all she got was a bit of verbal advice just to be careful what she posts.
Right.
But the way they were looking at it, they were looking to go down the dismissal route because her views and opinions was not in the line with the council's.
Mm.
Well, it makes no difference. The fact was, she's entitled to express her views and opinions.
So are you able to help people that have already been dismissed? For example, people that were given a contract and then because they didn't want to wear a mask, their contract was terminated.
It's more difficult once they've been dismissed.
Right.
It all depends what's been raised at the investigation and the disciplinary hearing.
Yeah.
What we do is you have to raise various procedures, legislations and acts right at the very beginning.
Gotcha.
Right. So at the investigation, if somebody says about wearing a mask, you say, well, I've said I was exempt. I'm exempt. I've asked for risk assessment. Yeah. You know, or if it's a philosophical belief on, it's my philosophical belief. I don't believe in face coverings. Mm-hmm. European Court of Human Rights has mentioned about burqas. I go down the same route as that. Or you need to bring in the right legislation. And then if you go to discipline, you raise exactly the same. Mm. Okay, the argument, and you go to appeal, you always hit on the same thing. We have a set lot of procedures. Yeah. Because when you go to a tribunal and you submit your case, you suddenly can't then raise an item. So because the other side will say, well, excuse me, Judge, they never raised that at the disciplinary or the appeal. If they had have done,
Yes.
may have considered it and come to a different opinion.
Yeah.
In employment law, there's a law called Birchall's law, and it's all deemed on, was the dismissal fair based on the information the manager had at that time?
Right. Okay.
If something comes to light later,
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily mean the dismissal was unfair.
Right. It's just we've been finding people are getting sacked without even going through the disciplinary procedure. So,
That's
you
unlawful
know,
anyway. You've got a right to go through the disciplinary procedure.
no tribunals either. And we've also had a case where a lady applied for a job in a care home, and they said that they would not consider her. And this is a big caring agency, Care UK or something. They said they would not even consider her if she wasn't vaccinated.
Well, that's blatant discrimination, because the discrimination aspect starts right from the very application.
Yeah.
Which some companies are not even aware of. As soon as you make the application, the discrimination laws kick in.
Yeah.
Straight from the application.
So there is protection there. There is
protection, but you've only, in a discrimination case, you've got to make the application to ACAS first. You have to make that within 3 months minus a day of the incident occurring.
Yes.
If it's a dismissal, say dismissal for not wearing a mask, you've got to be careful, because although the dismissal needs to be brought within 3 days, 3 months minus a day of the dismissal, if it's a discriminatory act, it has to be brought within 3 months minus a day of the discrimination, which may be prior to your dismissal.
Okay. So I'll need to get this video out to some people quickly.
And there's two ways on a discrimination case. You can either go down the common law case, which you can take to a tribunal, and through normal courts, so county courts and stuff like that, or you take to the employment tribunal.
Right.
So the discrimination case starts straight away, but it's important that they've raised things right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
To make sure that you don't fall foul of Birchall's law, the very first one.
Right.
And then you can start clocking it all up.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, can I just pick up on one other thing that you've mentioned before? You said that with regards to the lockdown case, you're using English constitutional law and the Magna Carta.
Yeah.
Now, I've had some people say to me, and I've rebutted it. Some people say that the Magna Carta was altered by Parliament and is now that there's only one clause left. My argument's always been, well, Parliament was made after the Magna Carta, and it can only act on acts that it's created. What's your thoughts about the Magna Carta?
Yeah, I've recently reread that. The issue is that the Parliament cannot make laws that takes away the rights from the Magna Carta.
Right.
Like you say, that it's the Parliament is created by the people, and it can't. Parliament therefore cannot take away the rights of the people that created it. I think that's the same lines that you was thinking there.
That's the way I think of it.
It's like you signing over, saying okay to a management company to say, okay, I sign over my house to a management company to look after the management of my house. But then suddenly they say, well, okay, we're selling your house and you're evicted. It's like, no, that's not part of it. I just take my acts back to myself. And the Magna Carta and the Bill of Rights is not really my forte. We have two other people who deal with that, Robin Tilbrook and Graham Moore is the other person who's a constitutionalist.
Graham Moore.
Yeah, commonly known by a name on YouTube as Daddy Dragon.
Right. Yes.
So, and we have other barristers who are dealing with the constitutional side.
Right.
I'm more on your employment law side to be.
No, that's brilliant.
Be truthful. And it's one of those, I go back to what my dad always said when he was asked, because he was a plasterer, when he was asked to build a brick wall, he said, if you want a brick wall building, you ask the builder. If you want a wall plastering, you ask the plasterer. And I go by the same philosophy. If you want employment law issues, you come to me.
Yeah.
If I want Magna Carta, I go to Graham or Robin. So
Let's stick with what you know.
stick
where
with
your
what I
skill
know,
set's
yeah.
at.
And that's
Brilliant.
why when we met your group, it was such great, because there's so many people from different backgrounds who had so much input.
Yeah.
And it's a case of bouncing things off people to say, well, what's the best way to go
Yeah,
with this? Because don't forget, the government's got all these departments
Yeah.
looking at the same way,
Yeah.
working together to make us comply with stuff
Yeah.
that we don't have to comply with.
Yes.
And we have to all work together to in exactly the same way.
Yeah.
You know?
Absolutely.
And this is why we was looking to help set up a Workers of Wales union as well.
Yeah.
To go down the same kind of rules, be politically neutral, looking after the individual's rights.
Yeah.
Although it's under the banner of the Workers of England at the moment,
Mm-hmm.
that's purely because we are already registered as a trade union.
Yeah.
It does take a long while and quite a lot of funding to get a union registered.
Okay.
So we registered the Workers of Wales union as a association of the Workers of England, so
Right.
that we can, because of the urgency in dealing with the issues in Wales,
Yeah.
we needed to do something, and we're more than happy to assist in that way.
No,
Employees
that's
and small
brilliant.
businesses.
That's fab. That's great. Stephen, you've been such a mine of information there. Your knowledge is immense, and I'm sure you're going to help a lot of people. Thank you so much.
Yeah, cheers for that. Like I say, it's all about, we've just got to stop this evasion of rights, but help small businesses, you know.
Yes.
It's quite funny, it seems to be the big corporations are the ones who are still operating. Yeah, it's the big corporations who try to avoid paying their tax and their dues the most.
Yeah, and they're putting people on 0-hour contracts and abusing them right up to the line, aren't they? Getting away with as much as they can.
Because I always worked on if you got if you treat your employee right, and I do know there is bad apples in there. I ended up having to dismiss my very first person I ever employed for theft. So, which was very upsetting, because I'm going back quite a few years. So I do know there's bad apples in there, but I always worked on the basis that if you get a good employee, they'll do the extra for you. They'll go that extra mile.
You get that loyalty, don't you?
And I'm saying that because I've just took on an office assistant, and it's the second week and she's sat opposite me.
Oh no, that's brilliant. I'm sure it'll go well, Stephen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you ever so much. It's been absolutely brilliant talking to you. And I'll get this posted up, and I'll put the link for the Workers of England Union.
Yeah,
in the
we have. I'm just waiting for the Welsh contingent that we met down there to translate some stuff for my website. I have set up another a Welsh branch web page for the website.
Brilliant.
But until they give me a Welsh translation for the stuff that's going on, that will go live as soon as I get that.
That's brilliant, because the Welsh language is very hard to translate. Google has no clue.
I've found that out when I've tried to use it. I did try to learn Welsh from my cousins who were down there when they were learning it in school. I'm not a very language person.
No,
it's not.
I did for a year. I did the All-Pan course for a year, and I gave up when it came to how to say yes and no.
Right.
They have different ways. They have different ways depending on the question.
So it goes a bit like sign language, doesn't it? That's a bit.
Oh, really? Is that the same? Is it?
My sister-in-law teaches, deals with sign language and teaches.
Yeah. Oh, fab.
That's kind of backwards to how the questions are normally asked.
Right. Okay. I didn't realise that sign language is.
I'm very obviously. I support them translating Welsh fully behind all that, because it's a culture that should not die out.
Absolutely. Well, also that in my thoughts, Welsh is an ancient language.
Yes.
Whereas English has been changed to suit the commerce. So they've got these trips and traps and things in there to make you create joinder without you realising. There's a lot of word magic in English, isn't there?
Yeah, that the when the officers say, "Do you understand?"
Yes.
No, I do not
That
stand
means
under you.
stand under. Yes. And there's so much of it. Black's Law Dictionary is huge.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I'm well behind all protecting that, because obviously I as an English person, I want to protect my culture, and I don't think any person who wants to protect their own culture can deny another person protecting theirs.
correct. Yeah.
And I'm well behind that.
No, yeah, no, it's I'll probably get back onto the learning Welsh when all of this is over and I have time again. So thanks again,
No
Stephen.
worries.
All right, you take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.